Ava Mitchell walked into the Sterling Heights Bank expecting to move $7 million only to be treated like an imposter. But within minutes, the truth unraveled. She wasn't just a client, she was the owner of the entire institution. Stay with us, because this story doesn't end with exposure. It ignites a movement that transforms the meaning of power, justice, and dignity. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. The morning air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the low hum of polished conversations. On the corner of Montgomery Street in San Francisco's bustling financial district, the glass facade of Sterling Heights Bank gleamed like a fortress. Inside, marble floors reflected the cautious steps of clients, each absorbed in their own silent reveries of wealth and power. But the real story that morning wasn't about balance sheets or interest rates. It was about who dared to walk through the doors. Ava Mitchell, 47 years old, and dressed in a cashmere sweater, the color of storm clouds, crossed the threshold with a quiet grace that turned no heads. She wore dark jeans, simple leather flats, and carried nothing but a slim black portfolio. Her hair, a sleek bob, just brushing her collarbone, framed a face marked not by the softness of privilege, but the resilience of battles fought and won. There was no entourage trailing her, no assistant whispering confirmations into her ear. To an observer, she might have seemed like any other professional, perhaps an executive from a neighboring firm coming in for a routine transaction. But Ava Mitchell was not just any professional. She was the CEO of Mitchell Dynamics, a tech conglomerate worth billions, and the undisputed majority shareholder of the very bank she had just entered. Yet she chose to step in alone. The moment she approached the front desk, a young teller greeted her with mechanical courtesy, asking for her business. Ava's voice was steady and soft, almost disarming. "I need access to the private client lounge," she said, sliding her identification and a sleek black card embossed with gold. "I'm here to authorize a $7 million transfer." The teller barely glanced at the credentials before nodding, gesturing toward a glass-walled room near the back. "Of course, Ms. Mitchell," he said automatically, not bothering to truly read her name. Ava gave a polite nod, stepping past him into the lounge. It was a space designed to impress: leather chairs, arranged like chess pieces, a polished espresso bar humming in the corner, and an atmosphere so meticulously curated it felt almost sterile. The kind of place where deals were whispered and signatures sealed futures. Ava chose a seat near the window, the sunlight catching the faint shimmer of her sweater. She placed her portfolio on the table, folded her hands, and waited. The quiet was broken only by the soft shuffle of papers from the receptionist's desk and the faint clink of ceramic cups from the bar. No one in the room recognized her, or if they did, no one acknowledged her presence. That was until Cheryl Daniels arrived. Cheryl, the branch manager, was a woman in her mid-40s, with a severe haircut and an even sharper gaze. She approached Ava with the stiff-legged authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Without introduction, she leaned slightly over the table, her voice low but dripping with condescension. "Excuse me, ma'am. This lounge is reserved for verified clients. I'm going to need to see additional identification and verification of your business. Ava met her gaze unflinching. I've provided my credentials. You can run my name. Cheryl's lips curved into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm afraid that's not sufficient. We need more concrete proof before granting access to these facilities. Company policies, you understand. Ava's silence was not the silence of compliance. It was the silence of calculation of a mind that had navigated hostile boardrooms and dismantled barriers built by generations of systemic exclusion. She knew this was not about policies. It was about her. As Cheryl hovered, a young man in an expensive tailored suit, Paul Henderson, a junior banker, approached with an air of mock helpfulness. "Ma'am, perhaps you'd like to wait in the main lobby while we sort this out," he suggested, his tone patronizingly smooth. "It shouldn't take long." Ava didn't move. Her hands remained folded on the table, her face impassive. But behind her stillness, something had shifted. A memory, perhaps, of being overlooked in her early career, of clients asking for the real decision-maker when she stood at the head of the table, of policies applied to her that never seemed to apply to others, that quiet indignity of erasure dressed in politeness, but cutting all the same. A hush began to spread through the lounge as nearby patrons glanced up, sensing the undercurrent of tension. A young couple by the espresso bar paused mid-sip, their eyes darting between Ava and the staff. A middle-aged man with a newspaper lowered it, the headline forgotten. Even the pregnant teller behind the counter glanced nervously toward the unfolding scene. Ava's voice, when it came, was soft but carried weight. "You may want to check the ownership records of this branch," she said. "Before you make a decision, you can't reverse." But Cheryl waved a dismissive hand, calling over the security guard Marcus Doyle. His uniform was crisp, his expression professional, but his eyes mirrored the assumptions of the others. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask you to leave," he said, his tone laced with finality. Ava finally moved. Not to rise, not to protest, but to open her portfolio and tap a discreet command on her phone. Her assistant, waiting a block away, would already be receiving the signal. As she closed the device with deliberate calm, her gaze swept the room. She saw the silent witnesses, the reluctant participants, and the quiet victims of complicity. And she knew this was no longer just a transaction. It was a reckoning. In that moment, as the tension stretched taut and unspoken words hovered like a storm cloud, Ava Mitchell sat at the center of the room, not as a dismissed client, but as the architect of a storm about to break over Sterling Heights Bank. And when it did, the world inside that glass lounge would never be the same again. The air inside Sterling Heights Bank was thick with a tension that had begun as a whisper, but was now climbing toward an inevitable crescendo. Ava Mitchell remained seated. Her hand still folded the curve of her mouth, almost unreadable. Yet her stillness was a storm, barely contained a silent message that crackled with the static of restraint. Across from her, Cheryl Daniels straightened her smile, sharpening into something predatory, as she motioned subtly for Marcus Doyle, the security guard, to step closer. "I'm going to have to ask you one last time to leave." Ma'am, Marcus said, his voice a measured blend of authority and discomfort. His uniform, meticulously pressed, did little to disguise the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had seen this kind of situation escalate before, but usually it ended quickly. Someone left grumbling about unfairness, and the bank returned to its quiet hum of transactions. But this time, something was different. The woman before him didn't radiate the defiance of someone caught in the wrong. She exuded the patient confidence of someone waiting for the inevitable truth to surface. Ava met Marcus's gaze, her voice low and calm. "You're making a mistake, but I won't stop you from proceeding. Just understand that every word, every action here today will be accounted for." Her words, delivered with the cadence of someone used to being underestimated, sent a ripple through the lounge. A few patrons, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding, instinctively reached for their phones, their thumbs hesitating over the record button. But Ava's eyes flicked toward them, and as if understanding her unspoken plea, they lowered their devices. This wasn't about spectacle. This was about truth. Cheryl's impatience flared. "This isn't a negotiation, Ms. Whoever you are. We have protocols to follow." Before Marcus could lay a hand on Ava's arm, a voice broke through the rising tension, a voice that neither challenged nor pleaded, but simply stated a fact. "This woman is the CEO of Mitchell Dynamics. She owns this bank." Heads turned toward the speaker, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s who'd been sitting quietly at the edge of the lounge. His name was Caleb Hartwell, a seasoned investment advisor who had worked with Mitchell Dynamics for over a decade. His voice cut through the pretense, laced with an authority that didn't shout, but commanded attention. Cheryl's face blanched, her bravado faltering for the first time. "That's impossible," she snapped, though her voice lacked conviction. If she were, she'd have said something. Ava's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, not of triumph, but of quiet acknowledgement. "I didn't need to," she said softly. "You revealed yourselves without me saying a word." The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation, clearer than any proof. But Cheryl, driven by pride and a need to reclaim control, waved dismissively. "This is absurd." She hissed, her voice climbing higher, tinged with panic. "Security, remove her now." Marcus hesitated. His training told him to follow orders, but something about this situation felt off, felt wrong. The woman seated before him didn't resemble a criminal or a disruptive client. Her posture, her calm, her deliberate words, they spoke of power, not deceit. And now, with Caleb's revelation echoing in his ears, doubt clawed at his certainty. The pause was long enough for Ava to speak again, her voice cutting through the thickening silence. "Check the ownership records. You'll see my name. You'll see the documentation signed and notarized by your own compliance officers." Or she added, her gaze narrowing slightly. "You can continue on this path and see where it leads." The air shifted, as if the very walls of the bank were absorbing the weight of her words. Clients began murmuring, their voices low, but urgent, some nodding, some shaking their heads. A woman near the window whispered to her companion, "She owns it." Then why is she being treated like this? Cheryl's veneer cracked further, her voice rising to a near shriek. "This is insubordination. You're disrupting the entire branch." Ava stood then, not with a flourish, but with the quiet inevitability of a tide rising against the shore. She was not loud. She didn't need to be. Her presence, once seated and composed, now filled the lounge with a quiet power. "You disrupted this branch the moment you decided to humiliate a client based on appearance and assumption," she said evenly. "The only thing I'm disrupting is your illusion of control." It was then that Marcus lowered his hand, his shoulders sagging slightly as realization dawned. He stepped back, no longer a participant, but an observer of the unraveling. Cheryl's face flushed deep crimson, her breath shallow and quick. "This isn't over," she spat, but her words felt hollow, already overpowered by the truth swelling in the room. Ava's gaze swept the space-locking eyes with those who had watched those who had stayed silent and those who were now beginning to understand. Her voice when she spoke next was quiet but carried the force of a verdict. "You've shown me who you are," she said. "Now I'll show you who I am." The silence that followed was not empty, but brimming with the collective realization that something had shifted irreversibly. Ava Mitchell had not just resisted the quiet eviction from the lounge. She had laid bare a system of bias and presumption that for too long had gone unchallenged. The storm she had silently summoned was no longer on the horizon. It was here sweeping through Sterling Heights Bank with the quiet fury of truth. And no one in that room, not even Cheryl, could stop it now. The room seemed to shrink as Ava Mitchell, now standing, held the quiet power of a truth no one could dismiss. Her figure poised yet still drew every gaze, whether in disbelief, shame, or dawning respect. The sound of shallow breaths, shifting chairs, and whispers filled the air like static before a storm. But through the noise, Ava remained a steady force, her presence undeniable. Cheryl Daniels's face had lost its practiced smugness. Her eyes darted from Marcus Doyle to Caleb Hartwell, seeking a foothold in a crumbling reality. She fumbled with her words, her voice cracking as she clung to a facade rapidly dissolving. "You can't just claim to own this bank," she sputtered. "There are processes. There's verification." Ava's voice, calm and controlled, sliced through Cheryl's flustered denials. "The verification is already in motion. The corporate records are clear. My ownership stake is documented, notarized, and publicly available. If you had taken even a moment to look beyond your assumptions, you would have known that. But you didn't. Instead, you chose to dismiss, to belittle, to accuse." The hush deepened. Even the patrons, who had previously busied themselves with phones or quiet conversations, were now transfixed. The weight of the moment hung between them like a pendulum poised to swing. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his authority undermined by his own hesitation. He cleared his throat, attempting to salvage professionalism. "I think we should step aside and verify her claims," he said quietly, almost pleadingly. But Ava shook her head, her expression resolute. "Not yet. This is bigger than verification. This is about accountability. It's about seeing the faces of those who choose power over decency and understanding what it means to stand against that." Caleb, who had remained by the wall, now stepped closer. His voice was low, steady. "She's right. We've all witnessed how she's been treated today. And I know her history. She built this institution, pulled it from the brink, and gave it a future. She didn't come here to flaunt that. She came here to see how we treated people, how we treated her when we thought she was no one. And we failed." Cheryl's mouth opened to argue, but the words faltered on her tongue. The sting of truth was sharper than any accusation she could muster. Natalie Moore, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Her arms crossed her voice, trembling with a mix of frustration and regret. I knew she admitted her words quiet but clear. I knew who she was. I recognized her. But I thought if I stayed quiet, it would all just pass. I was wrong. Ava's gaze softened, though it did not waver. "It's never too late to speak up," she said gently. "Silence, though it feels safe, is complicity. Today, you chose to speak. That's a beginning." The murmurs grew louder, some nodding in agreement, others lowering their heads in silent acknowledgement of their own complicity. A few clients stood, their body language shifting from passive observers to silent allies. The tension wasn't gone. but it had evolved from confrontation to reckoning. Then, as if timed to perfection, a soft chime echoed from Ava's phone. She picked it up, her movements fluid and assured. On the other end, Carla Evans' voice was calm, precise. Ava, verification is complete. Corporate compliance has confirmed your ownership. Records have been logged and distributed. The board is aware, and they're watching. Ava lowered the phone and looked directly at Cheryl. You've heard it now. There's no hiding from the truth. The institution you tried to weaponize against me is mine. The power you thought you held was never yours to wield like this. Cheryl's hands trembled as her gaze darted around the room seeking allies. But even her usual supporters, Edward Klein, who had been lurking near the espresso bar, and Robert Sterling, who had played the reluctant assistant, stood still, their expressions unreadable. The quiet unity of Ava's stance had rippled through the room, disrupting the invisible hierarchy they had clung to. Ava stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper, though it carried to every corner of the lounge. It's not about revenge. It's about resetting the balance. About reminding everyone here that institutions aren't defined by protocols or policies. They're defined by the people they serve and the principles they uphold. Her words resonated, weaving into the very air of the room. Cheryl looked as though she wanted to collapse under the weight of her own choices, but pride kept her rigid. Still, the trembling in her hands betrayed her fear. Ava turned, addressing the broader audience, now her tone warm, yet commanding. This isn't just a lesson for Cheryl or Marcus or Natalie. It's a call for everyone here to examine how we treat others, whether in moments of power or moments of vulnerability. It's about recognizing when we've fallen short and choosing to rise above it. As her words settled, an unexpected sound filled the air, soft applause, hesitant at first but building. Clients and staff alike, those who had seen the scene unfold, and those who had felt its echo in their own lives, began to clap. Not out of obligation, but out of respect for the courage it took to stand to speak to disrupt the silence. Ava accepted the acknowledgement with a simple nod. She wasn't seeking applause. She was offering a mirror to a system that had long needed reflection. She turned back to Cheryl, her expression both firm and forgiving. This isn't the end, she said quietly. It's the beginning. The beginning of a different way of doing business. One where truth and dignity are not optional but essential. Cheryl, her defenses crumbling, finally lowered her gaze. For a long moment, the room stood in the quiet aftermath of revelation. The reveal was complete, the stand unmistakable. Ava Mitchell had not just claimed her place, she had redefined it. And as the realization settled into the walls of the Sterling Heights Bank, a new chapter began, one where silence was no longer an option, and truth was the foundation upon which everything would be rebuilt. A stillness had settled over the room, heavy and profound, as if everyone present realized they were not merely witnesses to a confrontation, but participants in something much larger. Ava Mitchell stood at the center, unyielding yet calm, her voice, having already revealed the quiet truth of ownership and authority. But now, the silence was no longer oppressive. It had transformed into a waiting hush, the kind that precedes a reckoning. Caleb Hartwell, who had previously kept to the sidelines, stepped forward. His voice, low and resolute, broke the quiet. Enough is enough. Today isn't just about an apology, a reversal of accusations, or a reinstatement of pride. It's about accountability. About owning what we've allowed to happen here, not just to Ava, but to every client we've marginalized through our biases and blind adherence to flawed protocols. His eyes scanned the room. meeting those of the staff and clients alike. The atmosphere shifted as though a dam had cracked. The pretense of professionalism, the neat suits, the polite smiles, the calculated indifference collapsed under the weight of real consequence. Cheryl Daniels' facade was gone, replaced by a pallid face, her lips trembling. Robert Sterling shuffled his feet, his earlier excuses evaporating like mist in sunlight. Even Edward Klein, previously lurking with a smirk, now seemed to shrink against the wall, his shoulders drawn in. Ava didn't need to raise her voice. She simply stood a fraction taller, her shoulders squared, her presence amplified by the raw honesty of the moment. "This is no longer about what I endured today," she said, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of unspoken years. "It's about what so many others have endured quietly, unseen and unrecognized. It's about the layers of silent discrimination, the dismissals, the humiliations that go unrecorded, because those targeted have neither the platform nor the power to speak back, until now." Her words, though measured, cut deeper than any outburst could have. The staff exchanged nervous glances, the fragility of their positions made stark by Ava's unflinching resolve. It was Robert who spoke next, his voice cracking slightly. I didn't mean for it to get this far. It's just the system was already there. We were following what we thought were protocols." Ava's gaze pinned him in place. The system isn't an excuse. It's a shield people hide behind to justify inaction. You followed a system that was designed to protect the institution, not the people it claims to serve. And today that stops. Here. Now. The door at the far end of the lounge opened quietly, and two compliance officers dressed in sharp but understated attire entered. They held clipboards and discreet recording devices, but their very presence was a signal the higher levels of accountability had arrived. One of them nodded respectfully to Ava, acknowledging her not as a disruptive client, but as a peer, even a superior. "Mrs. Mitchell, the elder of the two officers, said, corporate has authorized full compliance review. We've been instructed to proceed immediately with a complete audit of this branch's practices, client interactions, and staff conduct. Your leadership in this process is not just welcome, it's essential." Ava nodded, her expression calm, but her eyes reflecting a quiet fire. "Thank you," she said. "Let's begin with the staff who played direct roles in today's incident." Cheryl's hands, which had been trembling at her sides, clenched into fists. "You can't just do this," she whispered hoarsely. "You're not above the rules." Ava's voice, gentle yet unwavering, answered, "I'm not above the rules. I'm rewriting them. And today those rules will reflect justice and dignity." The compliance officers began reading out the initial steps: an immediate suspension of Cheryl Daniels pending a formal investigation, termination of Robert Sterling for dereliction of duty and complicity, and a permanent barring of Edward Klein from all corporate events and affiliations, citing documented instances of harassment and misconduct. Each announcement punctuated the air like a verdict, each name stripped of pretense, leaving only responsibility. Natalie Moore's voice, thin and uncertain, broke through. I'm sorry. I should have said something. I should have done something. I was afraid, but that doesn't excuse it. I failed today." Ava regarded her for a moment, the weight of disappointment evident, but tempered by a flicker of compassion. "Acknowledging failure is the first step toward change, Natalie," she said. "But change isn't just words. It's actions. If you're willing to be part of the solution, you'll have a chance to prove it." But it starts today with transparency and truth. A few clients near the back who had remained silent for much of the unfolding scene began to nod. One man, a retired teacher, his hands folded over a cane, spoke up. "She's right. We've all seen moments like this in boardrooms, in schools, in shops. But we stay quiet because it's easier. Today, I'm done being quiet." A ripple of assent moved through the room. Staff members, who had looked away now, met Ava's gaze, some with shame, others with determination. The compliance officers continued their work, documenting names and actions, gathering statements, their presence a symbol that this reckoning wasn't performative, it was transformative. Ava finally turned to face the entire room. "This institution has failed not just me, but every client and staff member who ever felt voiceless here. That ends today. Going forward, we'll rebuild not on silence and complicity, but on integrity and respect. And those who choose to stay silent will not have a place in this new chapter." Her words were not just a declaration. They were an invocation, a commitment to a future where accountability wasn't an exception, but the rule. The air in the lounge, once thick with tension and fear, now crackled with a new energy, a readiness to act, to speak, to change. As the compliance team set about their work and the first ripples of reform took hold, Ava stood at the center of it all, not as a lone voice against injustice, but as the spark of a movement that would ripple far beyond the polished floors of the Sterling Heights Bank. This was no longer just a reckoning. It was the start of a revolution. The first light of dawn filtered through the high glass walls of the Sterling Heights Bank, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Where tension had once filled the air, now there was a palpable sense of calm, a quiet acknowledgement that something profound had shifted. Ava Mitchell stood near the entrance, her gaze traveling over the transformed space. The overnight team, guided by the compliance officers, had worked tirelessly to realign the branch's operations with integrity and purpose. Gone were the hushed whispers of suspicion, the sidelong glances of judgment. In their place was a shared determination to rebuild not just policies and procedures, but trust itself. Ava's phone buzzed in her hand. It was Carla Evans, her executive assistant, calling from corporate headquarters. "Ms. Mitchell," Carla's voice, came through warm and steady. "The final reports are in. The branch has cleared the preliminary review. Complaints have been documented, and the compliance protocols are being rewritten. You did it. They're calling it the Sterling Rebirth." A faint smile touched Ava's lips, though her expression remained contemplative. "We didn't do it to make headlines," she said softly. "We did it because it was necessary, because we couldn't keep letting the wrong people define who belongs and who doesn't." Behind her, the staff, those who had stayed, those who had chosen the harder path of accountability, gathered quietly. Natalie Moore stood among them, no longer hiding behind procedure, but stepping forward, a hint of determination in her posture. Caleb Hartwell, calm and resolute, had already begun mentoring younger team members on how to foster inclusivity without compromising professionalism. Maya Reed, who had once been a voice of protest, now stood tall as a symbol of resilience, her quiet courage radiating strength. As clients began to trickle in, there was a noticeable shift in their demeanor. They were greeted not with formality alone, but with genuine warmth and a sense of welcome. An elderly woman approached Ava, her voice trembling with emotion. "I was here yesterday," she said. "I saw what happened. I came back today because I wanted to be part of the change. I didn't think I mattered enough to say something before. But now, I know I do." Ava's eyes softened, and she reached out to gently clasp the woman's hand. "You do matter," she said. "You always did. It just took a moment of truth for all of us to see it." Outside, the morning sun broke fully over the horizon, illuminating the glass facade of the bank with a golden glow. Ava stepped into the light, feeling the warmth on her skin as if it carried the weight of possibility. She knew that this was just the beginning, that the work ahead would be challenging, that there would be resistance from those unwilling to adapt. But she also knew that something irrevocable had changed, not just in this one branch, but in the mindset of everyone who had witnessed the events of the past day. Carla's voice returned softly through the phone. "Ms. Mitchell Corporate is asking if you'll spearhead a wider reform initiative. They're calling it Project Rebirth." Ava's smile deepened, but her tone remained grounded. "Tell them I'll do it, but only if we start with the branches where the silent clients still wait to be seen, where the unspoken injustices are still lingering. We don't need a show. We need change." As she ended the call, the bank's atmosphere continued to shift. Conversations sparked quietly in the corner's staff members connecting with clients, listening rather than dismissing. It was not grand gestures or dramatic declarations that marked the rebirth of Sterling Heights Bank. It was these moments of connection, these simple acts of recognition and respect. Ava turned one last time toward the branch, her presence no longer a disruption, but a catalyst. "Let's get to work," she said to no one in particular, but to everyone who needed to hear it. And with that, she stepped forward, not away from the challenges that remained, but toward the future that was already unfolding. Ava Mitchell's story is not just about a confrontation in a bank. It is not just a story of a woman being denied her rights or standing up to a system that tried to silence her. It is a testament to the quiet, unwavering power of integrity, the strength of resilience, and the profound impact of truth spoken calmly, yet unflinchingly. Over the course of a single morning, Ava's journey from an anonymous visitor in the Sterling Heights Bank to its recognized rightful owner was marked not by shouting or aggression, but by a composed determination that cut deeper than any outburst ever could. Her voice, though steady, carried the weight of a lifetime of being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked. Her presence forced a reckoning not only within the walls of that bank, but in the hearts of everyone who witnessed the events unfold. As Ava stood firm, what initially seemed like a moment of personal humiliation transformed into a public awakening. The staff and clients alike were forced to confront their own biases, to recognize the small, insidious ways that discrimination and exclusion can manifest in even the most polished institutions. The silence that once protected prejudice was broken not by an outside force, but by the voice of someone they believed could be ignored. And in that breach, light poured in. But the most profound aspect of Ava's story was not her rightful exposure of injustice, nor the firing of those who perpetuated it. It was what followed the choice to rebuild. Ava didn't let her victory become a moment of personal triumph alone. Instead, she used it as a catalyst for collective change. The creation of the Sterling Equity Program, the reformation of policies, the introduction of verbal conduct audits, and the genuine reconnection between staff and clients all reflected her understanding that real progress isn't achieved through retribution alone. It requires reconstruction with a foundation of respect and equity. Ava's story reminds us that systemic change often begins with a single act of courage, but it endures through sustained commitment to integrity. It's a lesson for all of us, applicable far beyond the walls of a bank or the confines of a corporate boardroom. It challenges us to confront our own complicity in systems that marginalize others. It calls on us to listen, to speak up, and to stand firm when faced with injustice, whether in public or private, whether directed at ourselves or at others. In our daily lives, Ava's journey can inspire us to embody patience, courage, and the willingness to engage in uncomfortable conversations. It encourages us to believe that even when faced with systemic barriers, our truth matters, and that the quiet strength of one voice can resonate louder than the noise of discrimination. Ava's story is a powerful reminder that leadership is not about asserting dominance. It is about elevating others, about ensuring that dignity is never conditional, and about believing that fairness should be the default, not the exception. If Ava's story resonated with you, if it made you reflect, if it stirred a sense of justice within you, then I invite you to join us in amplifying voices like hers. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Start conversations in your own circles. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you're not just supporting content that informs and inspires, you're helping to build a community committed to justice, empathy, and positive change. Let's make sure Ava Mitchell's story isn't just remembered, it's a spark that lights the way for others. Subscribe now, and let's keep this conversation going.